You socialize an older dog? Yes and no. It's kind of a gray area. It's really not black and white. Early socialization with puppies, depending on what source you get your information from, is 8 to 14 weeks. Some suggest 6 to 16 weeks. I usually say, 5 months and under is a good socialization period, but obviously the meat and potatoes is probably between 8 and 12 weeks. That's just my experience and opinion. Obviously, it could vary. Anyway, the older dog, especially if you adopt a dog or maybe you inherit it from a family member and it's just wasn't a socialized dog. And when I say older, young adult to, maybe a middle-aged dog, 6 or 7, you can never recapture early socialization for puppies. You just can't do it. However, there is something you can do. It's called habituation. And habituation in psychology, basically, it's just getting used to an environment. So I try to associate this in human terms. Like, let's say you moved into a new house and you live near the railroad tracks. You're going to hear that train for several months. After a while, you're not even going to hear it anymore. You're just going to be so accustomed to hearing it that you don't hear it. And that's kind of what we do when we socialize older dogs. It's more of a process of habituation where we are looking to just get the dog used to an environment. And when we socialize older dogs, and I make this mistake sometimes too, just because I'm, kind of going off the top of my head that, telling people you got to expose them to as many environments as possible. And while that's true at face value, that's not the process. You start in one environment. That's the bottom line, right? So let's just say it's a local park that you frequent. You're going to start bringing your dog there, and you're just going to stay away from all the activity as far away as possible. Even if you're just sitting with your dog, you don't have to actively do anything. You could just sit and be, right? You could do some treat work if you want, provided your dog, relaxes after a little bit, and then over time you keep going back to this one environment until your dog gets better. All right, that's habituation, as opposed to counter conditioning or desensitization, which are usually associated with desensitizing a dog to a stimulus. Usually aversive stimuli is where counter conditioning comes into play, or desensitization. Habituation is just getting used to an environment. And the objective is to get used to that one environment before you move on to the next environment. And I actually tell people, look, even if you take notes, actual notes or mental notes, whatever, you the first time you go to this environment, that's your baseline behavior. And then all subsequent visits, you should see progress. And anyone who's followed me knows that sometimes progress is in the form of a lot of peaks and valleys with a plateau at some point, right? You embrace those peaks and valleys, and your goal is that plateau, and then you move on to the next environment. So this is just a quick spiel. I can go on. I can talk about this for a long time, but and this is really just to shift your mind a little bit from active socialization, where you're exposing them to all these potential triggers. Start simple. We want that dog to just get used to that environment first, and let's just say it's a local playground. You get as far away from that playground as possible in the park, where the dog can still see and hear, all the activity, and then you move closer and closer with each subsequent visit. And if you got to use treats, that's fine, as long as you're doing treat work when the dog is in a lower state of stimulation. You don't want to go there when the dog is all amped up and start loading them with treats. Let them settle down. I can't. People think I'm nuts when I say this, but sometimes the best thing that you can do is nothing. It sounds so simple, but trust me when I tell you, sometimes the best thing you could do is nothing. Just sit there and wait. Let the dog process the information, settle down. Once you get a lower state of stimulation, then you can start actively engaging with your dog, doing some obedience and whatnot. But anyway, start simple. Get that one environment under control, then move on to the next environment, and so on. The goal, ultimately, is that your dog starts to generalize with all environments because they trust you, the handler. You've been in multiple environments before with a lot of repetition, and things have gotten better, right? So there's a little trust factor there. A lot of dogs aren't going to generalize, especially if they're older or if they have a past that we're unaware of. We may uncover triggers that we weren't even aware of, right? Because older rescue dog, again, or if you're inherited dog or whatever. But if you have to choose environments that you frequent, whether it's the local park, or the pet store or Home Depot. Now, if it's like a place like a pet store or Home Depot, your first visit, you're not going in. Stay outside. If it's a pet store, maybe stay a little bit further away from the entrance where at least you could see the people coming and going. You don't go in right away. Start away from the activity. If it's Home Depot or Lowe's, hang out by the mowers outside or the grills. Don't go in right away. Start simple, and then you work your way in with each visit. One environment at a time. That's how we accomplish it. Talk to you later.